Greetings and welcome once again to the Gaming Codex, the show where I try to explain to you all the various words and terms used to describe video games and the video games industry. Today's word is that of representation, and according to the dictionary definition, representation is the description or portrayal of someone or something in a particular way. Because in the end, that is all that representation is. The portrayal of something or someone. But when it comes to the media and an extension video games, representation is often used interchangeable with diversity, meaning that what is represented in a video game should not just be one thing, one type of character, one type of culture, which usually translates into enough with the Caucasian American males already in every video game. There are other options. The terms of representation and diversity tend to be a bit charged with all sorts of connotations and feelings behind them, usually driven by several groups of people that have banded together or in opposition of each other to conclude that this is something people need to fight over. And you think it wouldn't be because, why would it? Everybody's free to make whatever kind of video games they want with what kind of characters they want. Or at least they should be, but they're not always due to certain pressures, which I'll get to in a moment. Representation and diversity are also sometimes confused with tokenism, which is the act of inserting one single element, usually a character, that is not of the same culture as the main one represented in the video game, usually in a very, at best, two-dimensional way, with no real actual importance to the grand scheme of things. Though they tend to be quite in your face, sometimes quite obnoxiously, sort of like vegans. And while tokenism technically is diversity, it's about as shoehorned in there as possible and most often doesn't really do any service to the culture, the people, the idea, the whatever it was trying to represent. And it's mostly done by people who really don't care, but want to pretend like they do. And it always backfires. Now, what is the popular definition of representation? Well, there's kind of two of these depending on who you ask. The first one would be the end of video games, the apocalypse, the worst thing in the world. And the second one is the only thing that video games should focus on unless they bring Armageddon. Representation should be a non-issue in media and in video games in general, but it's such a politically charged subject that people will be dogmatically for it or against it, or against it while they are for it, or for it while they are against it. It's quite confusing, and it usually stems from none of these people actually understanding diversity or representation or tokenism or any of these. People have very restrictive, very limited understanding of what representation is, what diversity is in general. It's not even black and white. That would mean it's linear at least. No, this is a point. It's a single solitary point of understanding. Because to some, it's all down to tokenism. They see that there's a person of color in a video game, okay, that game's diverse. But what if it's more than that? This stems from the main problem that the majority of the gaming market is in the United States, which is a very, very racially charged nation. It has issues, a lot of them, issues that have spilled out into media, into video games. So when a company that's so far removed from that makes a video game about their culture, representing their people in a video game on the world stage like nobody has done for them ever, they're doing it on their own, for their own sake, to share with the globe their beauty, their truth, their feelings. They get called out for being racist, which is what happened to CD Projekt with The Witcher 3, by Americans usually, who can't really understand that it's not all about them. The world is bigger, which is why nobody calls out Japanese developers for putting a lot of Japanese characters in their video games. Why would they? They're made in Japan, for people in Japan. They already have giant enemy crabs, what more can you ask for? It boils down to the idea that people will make, first and foremost, what they know. And the thing they know best is themselves. And the best way to actually foster diversity in video games is to get more people making games. No American studio is gonna make a better video game about African culture than a developer that's actually from Africa. Oh sure, they can copy the aesthetic, the general ideas, but some of the details will be lost in the process, in the translation if you will. Though even so, sometimes the results can be great. Take for example one of the greatest video games ever made, Grim Fandango. It represents a culture that not a lot of people have access to, that not a lot of people can learn about, or at least couldn't back then, because, limited internet. Sure, it's not a direct representation of the Day of the Dead celebration in Mexico, but it is a beautiful work of art that exists because somebody tried to represent that, because somebody tried to share that with the world. Now, what is the marketing definition of representation? That can be summed up as, well, we're selling this in America, so make the playable character a white guy with short brown hair and set it in New York. And he better be holding a gun on the cover. There's this idea that people will only buy video games if on the cover they see a guy with a gun. White guy, short brown hair, usually. This isn't really, how should I put this? It's not wrong. There is a large segment of the population, the people that aren't necessarily into gaming but they play them from time to time, they'll just buy something that looks cool. And because America is such a big market, people with cool poses holding guns on covers, usually white dudes, short brown hair, they look cool. It's a part of the culture, so that tends to sell. And it does so because, well, even though you'll find statistics that say that half or over half of the gamers at least in the US are females, the ones that actually buy the boxed video games, that go to the gaming stores, that don't just buy stuff for mobile or from time to time they purchase a game, they tend to be dudes, usually white. So the market caters to them. You could even say that sometimes it panders to them, with some games not being allowed to have different kinds of main characters because the marketing departments fear that those won't sell as well. A fear that is usually a bit on shaky ground, brought about by very, very bad examples in the past. Some would say that games like Remember Me did not sell well because they had a female playable character prominently featured on the cover, not because the game was crap, which sort of turns out is a more important factor than pretty much anything else. That is still the most important factor of all that determines the game sales, usually. I mean, it depends exactly how big the brand name is, because after a point they can be just horrible and nobody will care. They'll sell out of inertia. But if it is something new, then the marketing department will latch onto absolutely anything, even Superstation, to get it to sell better. Sometimes even making some very broad assumptions about the people that are going to buy the game. Usually wrong assumptions. But you have to pander to the lowest common denominator, going by the idea that they'll be unable to empathize or sympathize with another type of character. And while it may be to a certain point true that psychologically the first reaction you have of sympathy, of empathy, is with somebody that's you, first and foremost, it doesn't really take a lot of effort to extend that to other people, to other types of people. Otherwise, probably Tomb Raider would have not sold as well. Also, that whole idea falls apart when people have to empathize with inhuman, incorporeal, completely unrelatable characters or entities. I mean, in most racing games, for decades, you are playing the car, not the driver, and still they managed to sell bajillions without having a white dude with a short brown haircut on a cover with a gun. And oddly enough, they were a representation of something. I mean, other than cars. They were a representation of car culture, which brings us full circle. Representation is pretty much anything you put in a video game. So closes another edition of the Gaming Codex. Come back next time when we will talk about a brand new subject. Goodbye.